Hello students, welcome to this lesson on biodiversity. If you remember, in the previous successive classes, we have studied fauna and flora of different biomes in the world. That means biodiversity status of different terrestrial and aquatic biomes. Now in this lesson, we are going to study biodiversity. What is biodiversity? Biodiversity is a measure of the overall variability of life on the planet or a given local area. This definition includes or considers three basic points. The first one is species richness and species diversity of the local area or planet. That means the extent to which an ecosystem contains different species and most of which are equally successful. The second point that biodiversity should consider is ecological variability or diversity of each species. That means variability of ecological niches. This refers to how many different ecological niches does each species manage to have in an ecosystem. The second point that the definition of biodiversity should consider is genetic variability of each species that wants to include the existence of several different but related gene pool or populations of the same species living in different area. To determine biodiversity status of an ecosystem, we can calculate index of diversity in that ecosystem. Index of diversity is a number indicating an ecosystem's biodiversity. An index of diversity can be calculated, and this can be used to give a picture of the ecosystem as a whole. One index of diversity is Simpson's index of diversity and is calculated from the formula capital N times capital N minus 1 over the summation of small n times small n minus 1. D is the index of diversity, capital N total number of organisms in an ecosystem, small n total number of individuals of a species in a given ecosystem. Here is as example three invented ecosystems: ecosystem 1, ecosystem 2, and ecosystem 3. These ecosystems contain the same number of different species: species A, species B, species C, species D, species E, and species F. But these different species have different individual members in each different ecosystems or areas. As you can see from the table, species A has 86 individual members at ecosystem 1 or area 1, 16 individual members at ecosystem 2 or area 2, and 23 individual members at ecosystem 3. The same is true in species B. Species B has 5 individual members at area 1, 17 individual members at ecosystem 2, and 25 individual members at ecosystem 3. Species C has 2 members at ecosystem 1, 16 members at ecosystem 2, and 27 members at ecosystem 3. D has 3 members at ecosystem 1, 17 members at ecosystem 2, and 5 members at ecosystem 3. Species E has 1 members at area 1, 17 members at area 2, and 12 members at area 3. Species F has 3 members at ecosystem 1, 17 individual members at ecosystem 2, and 8 individual members at ecosystem 3. That means these different species have different individual members at different ecosystems. So, how can we determine either a given ecosystem contains high biodiversity or not? To determine biodiversity status of a given ecosystem, we can calculate biodiversity index by using Simpson's index of biodiversity. D is equal to capital N times capital N minus 1 over the summation of small n times small n minus 1, or number of all organisms in an ecosystem times number of all organisms in an ecosystem minus 1 divided by the summation of number of individuals of each species times number of individuals of each species minus 1. So index of biodiversity in ecosystem 1 is equal to number of organisms in ecosystem 1, which is 100, times number of organisms in this ecosystem minus 1, which is 99, divided by the summation of number of individuals of species A, which is 86, times number of individuals of species A minus 1, which is 86 minus 1, that can be 85, plus number of individuals of species B, which is 5, times 5 minus 1, that is 4, plus number of individuals of species C, which is 2, times 2 minus 1, which is 1, plus number of individuals of species D, which is 3, times number of individuals of species D minus 1, that means 3 minus 1, which is 2, plus number of individuals of species A times number of individuals of species A minus 1, 1 minus 1, which is 0, plus number of individuals of species F, which is 3, times number of individuals of species F minus 1, which is 3 minus 1, which is 2, is equal to 1.348. That means index of diversity in ecosystem 1 is 1.348. And index of biodiversity in ecosystem 2 or area 2, D, is equal to number of organisms 100 times 100 minus 1, which is 99, divided by number of individuals of species A, which is 16, 16 times 16 minus 1, which is 15, plus number of individuals of species B, which is 17, 17 times 17 minus 1, plus number of individuals of species C, which is 16, 16 times 16 minus 1, that is 15, plus number of individuals of species D, that is 17, 17 times 17 minus 1, which is 16, plus number of individuals of species E, 17, 17 times 17 minus 1, that is 16, plus number of individuals of species F, which is 17, 17 times 17 minus 1, that is 16, is equal to 6.314. And biodiversity index in ecosystem 3 again, D, is equal to 100 times 99 divided by number of individuals of species A, 23 times 22, plus species B, 25 times 24, plus species C, 27 times 26, plus species D, 5 times 4, plus species E, 12 times 11, plus species F, 8 times 7, which is equal to 4.911. Therefore, this index of biodiversity gives us many information about the ecosystem. For example, if index of biodiversity is low, it suggests that the area is dominated by one or just a few species. That means the environment is hostile or harsh for the existence of different species. In this case, the ecosystem becomes less stable and the food web is so simple. And these few species can have low ecological niches. In contrast, when index of biodiversity is high in a given ecosystem, it suggested that more number of successful species flourish in this ecosystem and this ecosystem becomes more stable. Therefore, the ecosystem can support more ecological niche and complex food webs. That means the environment is less likely to hostile and environmental changes are less likely to be damaging in this ecosystem. Status of biodiversity in Africa. We clearly know that areas that have high plant species richness often also have high mammalian species richness and vice versa. The reason for this is not difficult to work out. We have just been talking about the way in which plants provide habitats and niches for animals. So, the more different plants there are, the more different habitats and niches for animals there will be. But there is one important exception. Parts of South Africa have a very high plant species richness, but do not have correspondingly high mammalian species richness. This is the fynbos of South Africa. The fynbos of South Africa has a very high plant species richness but has no correspondingly high mammalian species richness. This is due to plants grow on a very nutrient poor soils. So there is no protein in the plant's body to support a large number of mammalian species in fynbos of South Africa. Let us see some numerical data concerning African biodiversity. A quarter of the world's approximately 4,700 mammalian species exist in Africa. That is about 1,229 species. From this number of mammalian species, about 960 species found in sub-Saharan Africa, about 137 species found in Madagascar. A large populations of mammals, including at least 79 species of antelopes, are found in eastern and southern savanna in Africa. When we see bird species density in Africa, more than a fifth of approximately 10,000 bird species of the world are found in Africa. From this, about 1,600 bird species are endemic to sub-Saharan Africa. When we see amphibians species density, about 950 species of amphibians are found in Africa. That makes Africa, together with South America, the continent with the highest numbers of amphibians. Biodiversity in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is an important regional center of biological diversity in Africa. Some of the reasons for high biodiversity in Ethiopia is the first one, the wide range in altitude and climate. The second reason, the isolation of highlands of Ethiopia. And the third reason, the fact that there are so many different biomes in Ethiopia. These biomes include tropical montane forests, which are found in wetter portions of the western highlands. The second biome is tropical montane forest mixed with grassland, which is found in drier sections at lower elevations of the western and eastern highlands. The third one is temperate grassland. Temperate grasslands cover the higher altitudes of western and eastern highlands. The fourth, tropical dry forest. Tropical dry forest is found in Rift Valley and eastern lowlands with some dry grassland areas. The other is dry grassland that covers portions of the Danakil Plain. There are also deserts that are found in the lowlands of most parts of the country, including in Afar regions. The last biomes are aquatic environments or aquatic biomes that include rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds that are found in most parts of Ethiopia. Since Ethiopia is an important regional center of biological diversity in Africa, it is estimated that there are between 6,500 and 6,700 plant species in Ethiopia. This represents the fifth most diverse flora in Africa. From this number of plant species in Ethiopia, about 10 to 12% are endemic, which is approximately in number 1,150. Endemic species means native or characteristics of an area that are only found in that area. Endemic plant species are valuable to an area because they are adapted to the conditions, resistant to certain insects and diseases, source of food and shelter for animals in that area or in that habitat, and provide unique landscape. The story of plant species richness does not end with wild plants in Ethiopia. There are 11 cultivated crop plants that make our country Ethiopia one of the 12 centers of origin of cultivated crop plants or Vavilov center. In this case, Ethiopia is one of the 12 centers of origin or Vavilov centers of cultivated crops. First, let us see the 12 centers of origin of cultivated croplands or Vavilov centers. China Center, Indian Center, Indo-Malayan Center, Central Asiatic Center, Persian Center, Mediterranean Center, Abyssinian Center, South American Center, Central American Center, Chilean Center, Brazilian Paraguayan Center, and North American Center. The 11 cultivated crops that make our country Ethiopia one of the 12 centers of origin of cultivated crop or Vavilov center are coffee arabica, coffee, Eragrostis ጤፍ እንሰት ventriculum እንሰት Coccinia abyssinica አንቾት Wheazotia abyssinica Niger seed Brassica carinata Ethiopian rape Cartamus tinctures sunflower Sorghum species or sorghum Hordeum species barley Linum usitatissimum or linseed Ricinus communis castor bean. These are the 11 cultivated crop plants which have their center of genetic diversity in Ethiopia or Abyssinia. Let us see forage plants. Ethiopia is also an important center of genetic diversity of forage plants. There are about 46 leguminous or forage plants that are endemic to Ethiopia. This includes species of trifolium or clover, vigna, a type of bean, and lavla. These plants have two main advantages. The first one, they have been used as animal feed. The second advantage is they add nitrogen to the soil in which they grow as they have nitrogen fixing bacteria living symbiotically in their roots. When we see vertebrate species diversity in Ethiopia, there are 5 groups of vertebrates. These are mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. When we see number of species of each groups in our country Ethiopia, number of species of mammals are 277 and 22 of them are endemic to Ethiopia. Number of species of birds are 861 and 27 of them are endemic to Ethiopia. Number of species of reptiles are 78 and 3 of them are endemic. Number of species of amphibians are 63 and 17 of them are endemic to Ethiopia. Number of species of fishes are 101 and 4 of them are endemic to Ethiopia. In terms of avifauna or birds, Ethiopia is one of the most significant countries in mainland Africa. Ethiopia's diverse ecology contributes to the existence of tremendously diverse bird life. That is, as we see from the table, there are over 861 bird species in Ethiopia. At present, there are more than 69 important bird areas which are also important for large number of other groups of animals that are identified by Ethiopian Wildlife and Natural History Society. This makes Ethiopia rich in avifauna or bird species. Let's continue on functions of biodiversity. Biodiversity is everything to human being. That means biodiversity led human being to enjoy great life. Biodiversity important to food security and health. Food security and health is a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social, economical access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meet certain dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. An important component of health is a varied and balanced diet. Biodiversity is source of all balanced diet that includes proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and vitamin complexes. Thousands of species of plants and several hundreds of species of animals have been used for human food at one time or another. Some indigenous and traditional communities currently consume 200 or more species that can be wild or domestic sources for food. That means the availability of food security net provides important insurance for people to cope up with certain difficulties or to remain healthy in life. So, to safeguard human food security and health, biodiversity must be conserved. The second benefits of biodiversity is protection of vulnerability. Biodiversity safeguard or protect us from physical damage like storms and floods. That means biodiversity is natural buffers against floods and storms. As we know, tropical rainforest, mangrove forests, and coral reefs are an excellent buffers against storms and floods. So, biodiversity can also control or regulate global warming by consuming greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. Third value, strengthen social relations. Many cultures attach spiritual and religious values to ecosystems or their components such as trees, hill, river, or groves. There are many people that believe religiously on certain plants or trees and animals. So, these plants and animals create strong social bonds between these human societies. There are many beautiful plants and animals that are highly attractive and recreate or refresh human societies. In an ecosystem, ecosystems are highly decorated by biodiversity. That means ecosystems are highly valued for their aesthetic, recreational, and spiritual values. Therefore, ecosystems or biodiversity have developed social relations between increasing the bonding values of shared experiences. Other benefits of biodiversity is freedom of choice and action. When there is high biodiversity, no doubt that we can have high freedom of choice or we can have many alternative biodiversity products that we want to get. For example, if we want fish meat and if there is high diverse fishes that have different sizes, we can choose the best fishes that have high meat products. The same is true in hunting best terrestrial animals. Diversity of plants, mostly trees, and some animals give us high probability to increase material wealth and hence it guarantees us with high freedom of choice and action. That means when there is high biodiversity in an ecosystem, we can have a great chance to get wild or domestic meats, timber products for household materials, cereal plant products, and so on. The functions or benefits of biodiversity from an ecosystem or Earth in general is ecosystem services. We can acquire ecosystem services in different forms in support, provision, regulation, and cultural forms. These different forms of ecosystem services let human beings to acquire different constituents of well-being. This constituent of well-being includes security, basic materials for good life, health, and good social relations. As you can see from the diagram, ecosystem gives us services in different forms. The first forms of ecosystem services are supporting form. This is the baseline forms of ecosystem services since it includes nutrient cycling, soil formation, and primary production. In supporting forms, some groups of organisms recycle nutrients in an ecosystem. Other groups of organisms engage in soil formation and development, and many others produce primary products through photosynthesis. So, biodiversity provides us with food, fresh water, wood, fiber, and fuels. Biodiversity control and regulate climate, flood, disease, and water purification for human beings. This biodiversity also have aesthetical, spiritual, educational and recreational values to human beings. These ecosystem services make human well-being. That means ecosystem services make human being safe, get secure resource access, being protected from disasters, acquire adequate livelihoods, acquire sufficient nutritious food, access to goods, have shelter. It makes us to have good strengths, feel well, access to clean air and fresh water, develop good or positive social cohesion, to develop mutual respect, to develop the habit of helping each other. This lastly assures to individuals freedom of choice and action. That means it gives us an opportunity to be able to achieve what an individual values doing and being. A loss of biodiversity will reduce ecosystem benefits or ecosystem services locally and globally. We human beings have practiced with direct or indirect effects on biodiversity loss. Okay, first let us see practices with direct effects on biodiversity loss. These direct practices include deforestation. We human beings usually deforest forests for two main reasons. The first reason, to clear land for human activities such as for mining, agriculture, or house building procedures or purposes. The second reason is to obtain timber products such as paper, charcoal, furniture, or to use as a building materials. The second practice with direct effect on biodiversity loss is expansion of agriculture. What are the effects of agriculture on biodiversity? Expansion of agriculture is one of human practice in which large areas of land are covered by just one crop plant. That means the area is dominated by just one species. The area do not support diversity of life. This results in reduction of biodiversity for several reasons. The first reason is pests and weeds that exist on the farmlands as part of biodiversity are just eradicated by pesticides and herbicides for the intention of increasing crop yields. The second reason, hedgerows that grow around the fields are removed to create bigger and more productive fields. So, this intensive farming of just one crop year after year, keeping pests and weeds away by pesticides and herbicides, respectively, to reduce ecological variability or niches. Such practices have been blamed for decline and, in some cases, local extinction of some species, fuelwood collection and illegal logging, overgrazing by stock. This reduces the availability of forage and woody plant species for other animals. Introduction of improved crop varieties. These habits reduce genetic diversity of the particular crop plant as only the improved variety is used continuously. Overhunting or poaching. This practice directly reduces the number of species that have been hunted. Introduction of alien invasive species. These often outcompete native species for available resources, sometimes making native species locally extinct. Practices with indirect effects on biodiversity. The first one is high population growth. High population growth, the more people there are, the bigger the demand for resources of all kinds, which puts pressure on land to be used for supporting humans rather than other species. The second one, undervaluation of biodiversity resources. If biodiversity is not seen as important at all levels of government, then attempts to maintain biodiversity will not receive a high enough priority. This results in a lack of incentives for communities to conserve their local biodiversity. The third one, legal and institutional systems that promote unsustainable exploitation of resources. This results in big companies being able to make a big profits from exploiting Ethiopian resources in non-sustainable ways. Biodiversity resources will not be there in the future as a result of these practices. Companies like paper factories and fisheries. The fourth one, disregard of traditional communal land management systems. Traditional methods of land management conserved the species present and used them to support community. These are at risk as more communities are engaged to use more high-yielding and intensive practices. What can we do about biodiversity? Due to certain factors that affect biodiversity negatively, our biodiversity has fallen from 90% of its potential in 1900 to 70% in 2000 and is projected to fall to 60% by 2050 and carrying on the projection to 50% by 2100, with most of this biodiversity in areas such as desert and tundra that are difficult to exploit. So generally, we are losing 10% of our biodiversity in every 50 years. We continue to lose our biodiversity in high alarming rate than we are losing now. There is considerable evidence to suggest that the rate of species loss, therefore loss of biodiversity, will actually increase in the future. As we can see from the figure, past, present, and future have different biodiversity extinction rates per thousands of species per millennium. When we see extinction rates of biodiversity or mammals that lived distant past based on their fossil records, for every mammal species, less than one went extinct every millennium. When we see current extinction rate, it is up to 1000 times higher than the fossil records. And when we see projected future extinction rate, it is more than 10 times higher than the current rate of extinction. If biodiversity extinction rate continued in this pace or in this manner, no life would remain on Earth in the next distant future. Previously, we studied past, recent, and future rate of biodiversity decline. We lose our biodiversity in high alarming rate. To let ourselves live on Earth, we must not allow this to continue. We must conserve our biodiversity for future generations and appreciate that we have duty to take care of biodiversity. Every future generation of humans has the right to enjoy and make use of biological resources of the planet that are available to us today. This is the core principle of conservation. So, biodiversity conservation means the process of preserving or restoring an ecosystem and use resources in sustainable ways. There are three guiding ideas to preserve or restore biodiversity. The first one is research. Research is the process of finding an exact ways or solutions to preserve or restore biodiversity to use in sustainable ways. The second guiding idea is minimum intervention to habitat. This is the mechanism that can initiate and shape characteristics of populations, communities, and ecosystems. The third guiding idea is repair rather than replace. It is always better to try to help an ecosystem to repair any damage rather than try to replace it in order not to lose or let extinct some plants or animals from the previous ecosystem. There are certain ecological principles that form the basis of conservation of biodiversity. This includes any protection of species and varieties of species will support biodiversity. Maintaining habitats is fundamental to conserve species. Preserve large areas since Large areas usually contain more species than smaller areas with similar habitats. Minimum disturbances to habitats shape the characteristics of populations, communities, and ecosystems. And then we have to avoid climate change because climate change will increasingly influence all types of ecosystems. The key to maintaining biodiversity will be maintaining habitats. If we can maintain habitats, the organisms will continue to visit them and live there. This will become increasingly difficult because of climate change. But if possible, we should not allow existing habitats to become eroded, and we should extend them. To help conserve our biodiversity, we should also use our resources in sustainable ways. This means we must not continue to overfish the oceans. That means we must take only an agreed quota each year, but the types of fish eaten must be more diverse. Second, we must not continue to fell rainforest in the current manner. It must be felled sustainably by strip felling techniques. So, one practice that has been adopted is to fell a strip of forest approximately 20 meters wide and take the felled trunk to the sawmill for processing. This strip of land is not touched again for 20 years. In those 20 years, a secondary succession will have produced secondary forest and the 20-year-old trees can be felled. For the intervening 19 years, other strips of forest are felled. Some areas are left completely untouched and act as a seed bank and core area, which maintain all ecological niches for the whole area. We must not continue to reduce genetic diversity of stock animals and crop plants by breeding only those that produce certain desired products like lean meat, high milk yield, and high grain yield. And lastly, we must not continue to grow vast areas of cereals in monoculture. In 2005, the Ethiopian Institute of Biodiversity Conservation in Addis Ababa put forward a national biodiversity action plan. This is a significant document running to 115 pages, which reviews the current situation and makes numerous recommendations. Some of these recommendations are listed below in two categories based on ecological consideration and based on socioeconomic considerations. When we see ecological considerations, one, accelerate recovery by enrichment planting of target species in degraded remnant forests. Second, establish corridors to enhance biodiversity and eventually the viability of fragmented forests, particularly in the central and northern highlands of Ethiopia. Third, establishment of buffer zones through tree planting to stop further degradation of isolated forest fragments. Planting native woody species may be necessary on sites that lack vegetation, for example, steep slopes. Fifth, establishment of tree plantation which can serve as nurse crops on highly degraded sites. Sixth, establishing area enclosures may be necessary to enhance natural regeneration and diversity of the native flora, particularly in arid and semi-arid regions of the country. And lastly, control or eradicate alien invasive species by using integrated pest management system. When we come to socio-economic considerations, the first one, allow meaningful participation by all stakeholders. People who have any interest in a particular course of action, including in decision making and implementation. Second, consider local socioeconomic needs in choices of approaches and options in matters impacting the local biodiversity. Third, strengthen local organizations. Fourth, make land and tree tenure completely secure. And lastly, formulate policies that promote sustainable utilization and conservation of biodiversity.